Have you ever imagined what our domestic animals would look like if they lived in the wild? We're familiar with the various breeds of dogs, cats, and other pets that live alongside us in our homes. But what if they had evolved without human intervention? Just as there are wild counterparts like wolves for dogs and big cats for our feline friends, envisioning our domestic breeds in their natural, untamed forms opens up a fascinating world. From the sprawling savannas to dense forests, let's dive into how these animals might appear and behave in the wild. Goldfish are more than just common pets in fish tanks. These fish started as simple carp and have been changed a lot by people over time. They first came from wild fish that were usually grey or silver. The story began in ancient China, around 265 to 420 AD, when people first noticed some carp getting red scales, making them stand out. Through the next few centuries, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, people chose goldfish with special colors and shapes to keep in their homes. By the Ming dynasty, which lasted from the 14th to the 17th century, goldfish were being kept indoors in bowls or small indoor ponds. This shift to living inside helped create many new, delicate types of goldfish that could not have survived outside. Nowadays, there are more than 300 different kinds of goldfish. These include simple ones like the comet, which has a long tail, to more unusual ones like the lionhead, which has a big growth on its head and no top fin. Some, like the bubble eye, have big sacs under their eyes, and others, like the celestial eye, have eyes that look upward. Because of how much they've been changed by breeding, many of these fish need special care and can't have babies without help from people. Studies have shown that all these goldfish come from a type of fish called the Chinese crucian carp. This carp is much bigger than the small goldfish we see today, growing up to 25 inches long and weighing about 7 pounds. The changes from a big, strong fish to the small, decorative goldfish show how much humans have shaped these creatures through breeding. Now, let's look at donkeys, which have been with humans for about 7,000 years, starting in East Africa. This was 3,000 years before horses were domesticated. Early humans found donkeys very useful for farming and carrying things because they could handle tough conditions. Over time, donkeys have been bred to be a bit smaller than their wild relatives. They're still very tough and can work well in hot, dry places. This toughness comes from their origins in areas with little food and harsh weather. Donkeys are still very important for work in many parts of the world. Today, there are about 8 types of domestic donkeys. They are generally smaller and don't have the wild markings like the dark stripe on their back that some wild types have. These stripes probably help them hide from predators. Even though donkeys haven't changed as much as other animals like cows or goldfish, they are still very useful. They help carry things, work the land, and are even kept as pets. Donkeys have stayed useful and strong, fitting into many human societies around the world. Today, scientists believe that our domestic cattle come from a wild ancestor known as the aurochs. These large animals were about 6 feet tall at the shoulder and lived during the Holocene epoch. They had impressive long horns that could reach up to 31 inches, lean bodies with strong muscles, and in males, these muscles were particularly pronounced, while females had smaller udders. Humans first domesticated aurochs around 10,500 years ago, and this process happened several times. Over time, these wild animals began to change under human care. Some modern cattle still show characteristics similar to aurochs, like their dark color and a light stripe running down their back. They still have the basic cow shape with hooves and horns, but they've been greatly changed by selective breeding. People have especially changed cattle with large horns to benefit from them more, which has increased milk production but decreased their lifespan. Today's cattle can live in environments that would have been too tough for their wild ancestors. We've even made hornless cows, which are considered safer because they don't hurt each other. However, the slim build of the ancient aurochs is mostly gone, especially in the huge breeds bred specifically for their size. Some of these modern bulls are enormous, weighing up to 3,300 pounds, compared to Brahman bulls for meat in the US that might weigh about 2,200 pounds, and Belgian blue cows that can reach 2,600 pounds. Each breed of cow has a different build and serves a different purpose. Researchers believe that today's goats were domesticated from wild bezoars in Western Asia about 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. This domestication greatly accelerated their evolutionary development and increased their genetic diversity. Now, there are around 300 different goat breeds, each adapted for specific uses. Goats have changed significantly over time in their behavior, body shapes, and even how their bodies function. As human agricultural communities grew and grains became a staple food for both people and animals, goats evolved to resist fungal toxins found in these grains. About 8,000 years ago, people started choosing goats for specific traits like size, fertility, udder shape, and color. Different groups preferred different wool colors and patterns. For example, the ancient Egyptians favored goats with long ears and no horns. It's easy to spot the differences between wild and domestic goats. Wild goats have straight ears and sharp, backward-curving horns. In contrast, many domestic goats have long, drooping ears, a trait likely popularized by the Egyptians, and their horns often spiral. Also, while most domestic goats have amber eyes, breeds like the Nigerian dwarf goat can have blue eyes. The variety continues to grow as people keep breeding goats with new and different characteristics. Pufferfish are really interesting animals with unique features like their minimal skeletons, beak-like teeth, and sharp spines. Scientists have been curious about how these spines developed, and they've recently discovered that these spines aren't just modified scales. They are formed by the same genes that create feathers in birds and fur in mammals. Interestingly, pufferfish don't have scales at all. The story goes a bit like the tale of pigs turning wild once they escape from farms. By controlling certain genes, scientists can reduce the number of spines or change where they appear on the pufferfish's body. Normally, these spines are strategically placed to protect the fish when it puffs up to scare away predators. The fish swallows water or air, its belly expands, and the spines help protect this stretched, vulnerable area. Despite their defensive mechanisms, pufferfish often end up being eaten. In Japan, they are used to make a risky but prized dish. Although chefs are trained to prepare this dish safely by removing the toxic parts, there are still occasional poisonings. The poison, known as tetrodotoxin, comes from what the fish eats in the wild. In 2004, scientists in Japan managed to breed non-toxic pufferfish by controlling their diet, essentially removing the poison sources from their environment. This type of pufferfish is more expensive because of the careful, controlled way they need to be raised, almost like pet fish living in luxury conditions. If this selective breeding continues, it might lead to a completely non-toxic domesticated pufferfish in the distant future. But that could take thousands of years, considering how specialized these creatures are. Now, let's talk about horses, which are quite familiar to many of us. After being domesticated, horses have evolved in ways that make them more suitable for riding. They have stronger spines and longer, taller necks, which not only look good, but also make it easier for riders to control them. Horses with long necks need strong upper bodies, or withers, to hold their necks up. It's hard to compare domestic horses with truly wild ones, since real wild horses are nearly extinct. But we can look at Przewalski's horse as a close example. These horses have short, stocky necks and low withers, which makes it easier for them to graze since their heads are closer to the ground. Domestic horses, particularly purebreds, usually don't need to reach down as far for food. They also tend to have longer legs and lighter bodies compared to wild horses, which have shorter legs and sturdier bodies to help them navigate rough terrain. Can you picture a world where poodles prowl and Siamese cats climb the rainforest canopies? Stay tuned and subscribe for more.